Oh, wait, I like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to call this evening's meeting to order. My name is Arva Rice, and I'm President and CEO of the New York Urban League, and I'm proud to be co-chair of the Commission to Strengthen Local Democracy. My fellow chair, Henry Garrido, will be joining us in a few minutes, and we can hear from him when he arrives. A big thank you to our host here at the Brooklyn Public Library, one of our city's great institutions. I want to take a moment to talk about the process here. Folks may be aware that there's more than one charter commission that's tasked with reviewing the charter. This commission is a distinct entity from the Charter Revision Commission that has been convened by the mayor. Both commissions are working simultaneously but separately. While this commission was convened via local law passed by the City Council, we are an independent body. It is our goal to hear from experts and everyday New Yorkers in order to propose substantial, effective amendments to the city charter. This means that if a proposal, regardless of the merits, is something that can be achieved by local law, it will likely not be up for our consideration. And I would be remiss, given the congressional hearings Mayor Adams participated in today, if I didn't mention that our sanctuary city status is a collection of state and local laws, not a charter provision. This commission is uninterested in reducing the rights of anyone in New York. For our part, this commission will continue to hold hearings like this one across the 5 boroughs and issue reports to get public and expert feedback on our ideas over the next several months. With that housekeeping detail taken care of, I'd like to ask my fellow commissioners to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Commissioner Yu.
Joanne Yu, formerly of the Asian American Federation, now serving as our consultant.
Thank you. And we'll just go around the table.
Hi, I'm Andrea Salwin-Kopel. I'm the Executive Director of National Council of Jewish Women, New York.
Rachel Goodman, I'm the Chief of Staff in the New York City Comptroller's Office and the Comptroller's appointee to the Commission.
Robert Raglia, appointee of Vanessa L. Gibson, the Bronx Borough President.
My name is Alan Swisher. I'm the General Counsel for the Office of the Queens Borough President and the Borough President's appointee.
Good afternoon, or rather good evening. Navardo Lopez, Deputy Chief Program Officer for the Gateway Development Commission, and I'm an appointee of Speaker Adams.
Good evening, I'm Dr. Ram Raju. I'm the Senior Advisor to the Borough President of Staten Island on Intergovernmental Affairs, and I'm also Director of Economic Development of Staten Island.
Good evening, Mark Winston Griffith, appointee from the Public Advocate Jemani Williams and the co-director of Free Speech TV.
Good evening, I'm Manny Pastreich, the president of SEIU Local 32BJ. We're a 90,000 member property service union that represents security officers, residential workers, cleaners, airport workers, and school workers in the city.
Terrific. Thank you, commissioners. With that housekeeping taken care of, I'd like to add, before we begin our testimony, we need to adopt the minutes from our February 24th meeting. Then they have been distributed to everyone. And I want to ask if there are any questions on the minutes. Any questions on the minutes? Okay. Do I have a motion to adopt the minutes as presented? Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Before we begin, I want to remind members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent during the other testimonies. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. Video recording or photography is not allowed from the witness table. At tonight's hearing, we are going to ask folks to limit their testimonies to 3 minutes. Commissioners are encouraged to ask questions based on the testimony given. Written testimony can be submitted to info@thecommission.nyc. I repeat, info@thecommission.nyc, and can be any length, and we welcome it up to 74 hours after this hearing. I'd like to ask our first witness, Rachel Foss, to come to the table. Please introduce yourself, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Good evening, members and staff of the Charter Commission. My name is Rachel Foss, and I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable government in New York. We appreciate that the Commission is committed to finding ways to strengthen our local democracy. New York City is doing great things to make its voting and campaign finance systems better and better. We strongly support ranked choice voting, the public matching system, and the Independent Campaign Finance Board. We also support you taking a close look at recall elections, which we think have potential for New York City. But democracy is so much more than the right to vote. New York City has long seen a healthy democratic society as one that includes a commitment by government to foster civil liberties, human rights, the rule of law, and basic principles of fairness. Fairness and political equality means striving to give everyone a fair shake. This is what gives our government its legitimacy. And corruption is the exact opposite of fairness, where some people get to cut to the front of the line because they know who to pay. Corruption rewards the worst of us and hurts the poor and vulnerable, who are the most dependent on government for help. New York City is being rocked by the biggest series of corruption scandals in many decades. This commission has to rise to this moment or risk losing a generation of New Yorkers to cynicism about whether government can achieve good things and apathy about their right to vote. You must set your sights high and champion the major reforms needed to restore public trust. New York is on our own. The federal sheriff has ridden into the sunset. We have to strengthen the city's frontline ethics and anti-corruption agencies. My testimony, the written, has a lot of proposals, and I know I don't have time to go through them all, but I'll just tick off them in brief. We urge the Commission to do the following 5 things. 1, create a New York City Independent Ethics Commission. 2, make ethics guidance far more transparent. 3, study and propose a removal mechanism for the mayor. 4, improve disclosure of independent expenditure committees, known nationally as super PACs. And 5, support sensible reform proposals like submitted by our colleagues Citizens Union and Citizens Budget Commission. Just briefly on the New York City Independent Ethics Commission, the state has a new ethics commission that was recently upheld, and it has some core features we think you should replicate. 1, it puts the lobbying and financial disclosure under one roof. 2, we think an independent budget is critical for the New York City ethics agency. I'll note that the Conflicts of Interest Board has seen a staff cut of 5 from 26 to 21 employees over the last 10 years and has had a flat budget. And then we also think an independently appointed board would be important. And just very quickly on independent expenditures, right now, an independent expenditure committee doesn't have to disclose expenditures or contributors until the expenditure and until an ad is actually seen by the public. We think that's far too late in the process, especially when we know that independent spending is getting much more and more common. I think I'm probably hit about 3 minutes, so I'll leave it there. And as I said, I have detailed testimony that was submitted to you all that I'm sure I'll be happy to talk to anybody about in greater detail. Thank you.
Any of the commissioners have any questions based on the presentation?
Yes. Rachel, thank you for your testimony. One quick question is regarding that we've seen in the past, especially with the CCRB, that requiring a minimum budget in the charter doesn't necessarily mean the agency can hire staff if OMB gets in the way.
Right.
Often, OMB is often known to slow walk the hiring, not just for CCRB, but for many agencies. Just wondering if you had any thoughts on how we could prevent that, or what defense the Charter Commission can have against that in their proposals.
Yeah, I think for the Conflicts of Interest Board, they don't even have an independent budget at all, like IBO does, or like you said, the CCRB. I don't have a great proposal to strengthen that. I know that the mayor has a lot of power over the budget process, obviously, but at a very minimum, we think the Conflicts of Interest Board or a newly appointed independent ethics agency needs to have an independent budget line. It has to be pegged to the size of government or an equivalent agency, because right now it's not, and it's basically had a huge number of new responsibilities. It has to manage the legal defense funds. And that obviously there are a few out there right now. And that's a huge responsibility that's hampered their ability to do their job. So at a very minimum, an independent budget pegged to the city overall budget would be an improvement. But certainly we'd be happy to look at ways to make it even stronger.
Thank you.
Again, I'm Manny Pastrich with 32BJ, and I just want to say for full disclosure that I am elected into my position. I know it has no impact on your testimony, but I guess I'm just interested in why you think there should be a local mechanism for mayoral removal beyond the existing inability committee, and how that process should be used, or how to ensure that process won't be used for nefarious political purposes.
Yeah, I think what we've been seeing now is, the mayor only can be removed by this inability process, and that's obviously not very analogous to the situation we find ourselves in right now, where the issues confronting the mayor are not about health or mental fitness. There are other issues. The state law is one where the governor was not willing to use it because it's seen as a usurpation of the city's ability or the right of the voters. And that's why we haven't outlined a specific mechanism. Recall elections are something that are used in other cities where the voters get a direct say in whether somebody should be removed. But I think, this is something we think this commission should study. We don't have all the answers on it, but it's clear that our current laws aren't sufficient.
Supreme Court making the public corruption very liberal definition of that. How is it going to be, even the Charter Commission agrees with that, how is it going to be even implemented? Because there's somebody going to, go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court are going to say, no, it's fine. Because they have seen so many public corruption cases have been kind of taken down.
Yeah, I mean, those are all been ones that have been brought by federal authorities, right? It's all been done by the Southern District. Very few are done locally. And we think that's in part because the current local entities don't have the resources. They don't have the enforcement ability. So, cases could be sent to the Manhattan DA, for example, instead of the Southern District for local charges if you have a stronger ethics enforcement entity. So we couldn't take care of ourselves locally. And obviously with the current kind of chaos with the Southern District right now, it's clear that we do have to do that. So there are we think basically that we need to strengthen our local laws, our local enforcement through independent commissions and through stronger laws so we can take care of it locally, because federally it's not going to happen.
Yeah, question. To what extent is what you're proposing replicated elsewhere or modeled in any other sort of comparably large city? And is there any data from those models at all?
On ethics specifically?
Yes, specifically.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to talk to that. So there are a number of other cities that do have a unified body that looks at both some of the ethics bodies actually look at campaign finance, ethics, and lobbying all together. We have a very strong campaign finance board, so we're a little hesitant to, change that structure too much. But we think combining lobbying and ethics would be important. That's done at the state level through the Commission on Ethics and Lobbying in Government. That could be replicated here. But there are, many, many other cities that have a unified ethics agency. Denver has a body that does ethics, campaign finance, and lobbying. Los Angeles. I could probably get you a list of more, but those are the ones that are off the top of my head. Philadelphia does too, actually, if you want a local one. They have a combined body. Yeah, we participate in this. There's a commission on governmental ethics law, or a commission on governmental ethics laws, and I went to their conference, earlier, late last year, and heard a lot of these commissions talk about, and their staff talk about the work they do, and I think that it's clear that having all these things under one roof makes their job easier. the nexus of money in politics is such that if you have the ability to look at more together, I think you can connect the dots and enforcement works better. So, like I said, I would look at, Philadelphia, Denver, Los Angeles as some examples just of locally done ethics where it's unified. Yep.
Thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. I had a similar question, whether there were any municipalities, cities, states that you could point to as potential models for us to investigate with respect to recall elections.
Yeah, I think that tends to be a West Coast phenomenon much more.
My wife is from San Francisco, so
Yeah.
very familiar.
And I actually might lean on some of our colleagues in the government watchdog, good government worlds. I know Common Cause, Susan Lerner is going to be testifying to you at some point, I'm sure. I know she couldn't be here tonight, but this is something she's studied and looked at. She's a former West Coaster. So I might, defer that to my colleague to answer some better questions or to answer that more in detail. I think from our perspective, this is ripe for you all to study. I don't have the specific answers, but I think there are plenty of experts who would be interested in talking to you, and we'd be happy to point some your way.
Thank you.
Questions from the commissioners?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you sort of elaborate, you talk about in your testimony about different appointment structure. So I was just wondering if you could sort of provide a little bit more detail as to what you're thinking for New York City.
Yeah, so I would just note that the Conflicts of Interest Board right now, there are 5 appointees. 3 are from the mayor. 1 is from the public advocate and 1 from the comptroller. That's, a mayorally controlled body, essentially, when its primary job is to regulate those who work for the executive branch. So that is just one obvious thing to note. One thing that we did achieve at the state level with the Commission on Ethics and Lobbying in Government is there's the law school deans are actually set up to vet the appointees coming from the governor, the legislature, for their qualifications and their independence. So they have a vetting process, and we think it went really well, actually. And so there are selection committee processes that could be looked at as well that are used for judicial nominations, for example. So whether it's a vetting process or a separate selection process, there's a few to look at, but I'd point to the State Ethics Commission and I'd point to selection processes for judicial candidates as one example for you, or 2 examples for you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late. It's good to see all of you. I have a question. Are you suggesting a change in the existing makeup of the Conflict of Interest Board or the establishment of yet another board?
I think that this commission could do either, and we ask you to be bold and look at we think a new independent commission as a ballot item for New Yorkers to approve would send a very strong message that corruption is no longer acceptable and that our city government is taking charge of corruption. So I would urge you to be as independent, make the body as independent as possible to respond to the crisis of the time we live in. But certainly there could be more interim or intermediate steps to improve the independence of the current board. So, we'd ask you to look big, but I think there are other types of proposals we'd support as well that would increase the independence of the oversight bodies we have now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We would like to invite Ben Weinberg of Citizens Union.
Good evening. My name is Ben Weinberg. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Citizens Union. We are a nonpartisan good government group that for over a century has been fighting to improve democracy and accountability in New York City. So we are thrilled that this commission is taking on these important topics. Last week, we published a report that lays out some of the reforms that we believe are needed to strengthen our democracy, to strengthen our ethics laws, to strengthen our checks and balances. In my testimony today, I'll only focus on a few, but I'm happy to answer any questions and comments on any of the proposals that are laid out in the document that you're looking at. First, on democracy and elections. We have an alarming trend in our city, and that is that voter turnout in city election has been declining for decades. In the last mayoral election, less than 1 in every 4 registered voter cast a ballot. That was a historic low of 23% of registered voters that voted for mayor. We've done a lot to make things easier. It's easier to vote these days. It's easier to register to vote. But unfortunately, we haven't really been able to move the needle in terms of participation in our local elections. Now, we believe the 2 reforms can help. The first one is moving our city elections to even numbered years. What's going on now is that our odd year election calendar suppresses turnout up and down the ballot, right? That's clear from every study, from the experience of other jurisdictions. Turnout for mayor in these odd numbered year elections is not only low, it's also an electorate that is older and wealthier and wider than the city as a whole. The impact of moving our city elections to even numbered years would be significant, and you can see examples from other cities that have done that in the report. Now, the state legislature has already moved many local elections to even years, and there's an ongoing campaign right now to amend the state constitution, which currently, unfortunately, requires city elections to be on odd numbered years. So we asked the commission to look into this issue, to support this proposal, and to consider how the charter might need to change should the constitution change. The second proposal related to elections is opening up our primary system. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but just to mention that our closed partisan primary excludes over 1 million registered voters, and that number actually grows with every cycle. That's the category of voters that grew the most in the last number of years, and we propose implementing a top-to primary system, but there are many examples of that could be adopted. The other issue I would like to highlight is related to checks and balances. Rachel already mentioned that, but we do support implementing a locally controlled removal process for mayor that would cover exceptional circumstances related to serious misconduct. There was a question here about recall. 11 of the 15 largest cities in the country have recall elections for mayor. It doesn't mean it's the best process. This proposal that I'm mentioning here is easier said than done, because recall elections have a pretty kind of complicated history. But I will say that we are looking now at how, given the kind of political makeup and structure of our city, we can have a fair, balanced, and practical removal process for mayor. And we are looking forward to presenting that proposal soon. Finally, just a note on ethics. Our report lists several ways to strengthen our anti-corruption regulatory regime, and one way is to strengthen the Conflicts of Interest Board. I'd just like to reiterate the importance of independent budgets for the Conflicts of Interest Board, and such independent budget should really come with enhanced powers. So not only giving them more staff and an independent budget, but also giving them more powers to, for example, cover other parts of the charter that are not only Chapter 68, giving them oversight over lobbying and other proposals that are mentioned in that report. I'll stop now and see if there are any questions.
Dr. Ram Raju from Staten Island. Thank you, Ben, for your testimony today. Just a word of recall election, because there's a reason why it's a 4-year and sometimes Senate 6 years. The reason the Constitution did that is because things change. What is popular today will not be popular next year, and what is unpopular today will turn out to be popular in a couple of years. We're seeing that all the time in our country. So the recall election could be a knee-jerk reaction because something happened, somebody doesn't like it. Then immediately a recall comes in, then 2 years later, somebody finds, no, that's not a bad idea. So how do you explain that? Because that's a big problem we continue to have. Otherwise, there'll be recall elections every 2 years. Somebody doesn't like it, then they can collect so many signatures and then it becomes a recall.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think you hit exactly the problem with recall elections that we see throughout the country. It's often too easy to get the number of signatures to call for a recall election, and more often we have private interests, very well funded interests that come in and try to kind of push for a recall election. So that is something that has to be done wisely. And just to clarify, we are not here to recommend recall elections because we know the problematics behind it. But the other option that people usually propose related to removal is impeachment. However, an impeachment is usually done when we have two chambers. So, lower house presents the charges, upper house indicts. We don't have that in New York City. We have just one legislative body. And sometimes there is an upper threshold. So you need more than 2/3 of that body to impeach. However, New York City Council has over 85% usually Democrats. So it's obviously kind of in the political dynamics of New York City, we can't really adopt exact systems from other jurisdictions. We're going to have to find something that cannot be easily politicized. And we're looking into what other states are doing, what other cities are doing, and hope to bring a more detailed proposal to this commission.
My question is one of practical applications to your suggestions about the change in the odd even election, because that would mean that either we would have a mayor for 5 years or a mayor for 1 year and then 4, given the circumstances. And then that has implications also for all the other political parties, not just the mayor. So how would you see the first chunk to it?
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you, Co-Chair. That's the question of transition. Now, different states and cities have done that in different ways. I should say, this reform has been adopted and implemented in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in El Paso, in Baltimore, in many other cities and states. The way the bill in Albany, the legislative proposal that is currently proposed, the way that is structured is that you'll have, whenever that is passed, lawmakers will continue their term and will complete their term. The next person elected to that position, and that will be mayor or all city officials, they will be elected to 3 years, and then the next election will be on even years. So the important thing for us here is that both the candidates and the voters know that they're heading into a short term, and that they're voting knowing that the next person in office will serve 3 years in office. The one thing to mention, as I said, this is currently in the state constitution. So the drawback is that it's going to take a long time to change it. But the advantage is that it gives us plenty of time to plan and implement. So plan for voter education, plan for how exactly transition is made, and plan for election administration. It's let's say in kind of best case scenario, the first mayor to be elected on even numbered years will be in 2032, if I'm not mistaken. So we have some time. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. And the second question applies to something you said, reference to the removal.
Yep.
Would not be, again, more practical to amend Section 10 of the charter to go beyond the issue of mental health capacity of that of the mayor as a process that already exists to also include quote unquote impeachable offenses than would be to rely on a whole new process without 2 chambers, for instance?
I think that is certainly something that we want to look into, and I hope the commission will look into. I think Section 10, in our view, it was written to reflect or emulate the 25th Amendment. So in that sense, it seems like the entire process was meant to cover inability, disability, right? So medical, mental, physical inability. And therefore, it's not only a question of the kind of definition of what is considered inability, but also who takes part of that process and what are the veto points. The Committee on Inability has mayoral appointees. So, and again, I'm not referring to the current situation. We're really thinking about the future here. If you are facing a situation where the legislative body or the people want to remove a mayor because of misconduct, it will be very difficult to do that if there's a kind of a veto point in the middle of that is goes to a mayoral appointee.
I'm sorry, but Section 10 also has a hierarchy of those serving there, as in the borough presidents, for instance. So, you know, perhaps part of the suggestion would be including more members as instead of who the longest serving borough president, that you have every borough president, for instance, that is elected by the majority of people as a way of considering it. I, I, I don't know that the situation rises to mental capacity, but it's got to be, it ought to be a very clear definition of what those impeachable offenses will be. Otherwise, as Dr. Raju said, somebody could just take a political bat and say, I'm going to organize signatures because I don't like the guy that's there or the person that's there. And I'm going to, with those signatures, go and pursue an article or section 10 for political reasons because I want somebody else, right? So I think strengthening democracy is our charter, but I also don't want to destroy, go overboard and point that it's a point of no return, that it becomes this mockery of the system where you begin rejecting the very views of the majority of the voters by the minority who knows how to manipulate the system. So I'm trying to balance the two here.
Yeah, we very much agree, and we think the main problem is that the current process is either vague or lacks any process. So, we started not from the charter, but from state law. State law gives the governor complete authority, total authority, which that's something we don't like either. This is not the jurisdiction of this commission, but so we do think that both of these sides, state law and city law, has to be better defined to make it clear what constitutes as inability in those situations and an improper behavior or misconduct that would trigger a second process.
Excuse me, just building on that, that Co-Chair Garrido was mentioning. I think there's three elements to it. It's the makeup of the members, the actual definition of the things, and then also what the threshold of votes is, because in the current 5-person system, you need 4 votes to do that. And with 2 of them being mayoral appointees, it just actually kind of almost makes it null. I mean, presumably they're thinking physical incapacity and people would have a little bit more discretion. But so I think it's not only just who the members are and what the jurisdiction is, but also what the threshold vote share is. And then I also just wanted to ask in terms of the changing to even years, since that really does require state law, and obviously the commission can't do like resolutions of support or something like that. It doesn't seem like there's anything that could be done in the city charter to change that, but I'm curious if you guys have thought any more about that.
Yeah, excellent question. I think I'll say 2 things. I think a statement of support from the commission, even in a final report, does mean something, because this is a commission that represents elected officials throughout the city and has and is thinking about democracy. So it is influential in our eyes. It really depends how the Constitution would be amended. So, it's hard to tell how it will happen. But there could be a scenario where the city charter eventually will need to be amended. So the city charter currently does state in several locations that an elected official has to be elected in every 4 years starting from, and that starting from is an odd number year. I think it says 1965 or something like that. So the city charter kind of does have its own odd number year calendar. If the city gets the ability to change its own laws, then the charter will have to be changed, and that will have to go through a referendum because that is considered a change of term. So there are many ways of doing that. You know, you can have a trigger charter provision. You can have it. So, you know, it's, we think the commission is like, this is exactly kind of the place to really think about this stuff, both from the kind of legal and political and just like, yeah, the balance of powers.
Right. So since it's unlikely that this commission would be able to just recommend the change because the state wouldn't have acted, but maybe we could recommend some kind of language that says as soon as the state acts, then there doesn't need to be another commission in this.
Precisely. Thank you. Yes.
I also am really intrigued by this.
Mhm.
Having done some.
Commissioner, could you move the microphone closer to you?
Sorry. You know, immigrant communities, communities of color, you know, the election cycles are exhausting. And to be honest, you know, the investment for civic engagement in our communities, it's not there. And so, you know, I am actually just really intrigued by this notion because having to figure out how we're going to get money to be able to explain to our community what is at stake and what they're voting for, because it gets very, very confusing to people. And so the questions that I know that I've gotten personally, you know, during every election, it's like, like literally the communities, like, do we have an election every 6 months now? And I think making this uniform, I think, goes a long way to communities that don't traditionally come out, and to be able to make force entities that fund civic engagement to really make some significant investments that are go a long way to pulling out, getting the voters out.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And we see that in our conversations with advocates or officials in other cities. That's exactly the kind of mechanism that occurs. It's just a high profile, high information electoral season. So everyone knows when there's a presidential election. But unfortunately, so many New Yorkers have no idea that there's a mayoral election, despite, well, you know, us kind of thinking about it all the time. You noted, I'll just note that there's been a couple of surveys on this on this reform, and they show that the moving elections to even numbered years has very high support, both statewide and citywide, and that support is across parties, so Republicans and Democrats and independents and age groups and racial and ethnic groups. So it's pretty remarkable to see that voters, as you mentioned, think that they're too tired, and there is truly voter fatigue in voting every 6 months, and they support this reform. And every time was brought to the ballot, it has passed essentially in all cities. So thank you for your comment.
My only other suggestion is, you know, you mentioned surveys and talking to the community, but I think it's really important to do surveys in language to be able to engage the communities, because immigrant communities often don't get asked those questions about what they think, and yet those are the very votes that people are going after. So there is a lot of mis and disinformation that we know, and so I ask you that when you do these, I have talked to every survey taker to say how many languages have you done this in, and I think that's really critical to make sure that the voice of every New Yorker is in some way heard.
Thank you. That's a very good point.
Good evening. I wanted to ask you about the advice and consent recommendation here. And I want to first just acknowledge how politically sensitive and volatile any conversation around police department is. And and in this proposal, you focus on the city, the police department at the exclusion of other agencies, right? And I know it's not your job to be to think this through, sort of how this is going to work politically and on and how to market this. But I think that at the point you single out the police department, it then makes it subject to criticisms that you are distinguishing the police department in ways that you're and treating it in ways that you're not treating other agencies. So I know you've made somewhat of an argument here, but if you can give me a compelling argument that will stand up to scrutiny about singling out the police department and not subjecting other agencies to this same kind of to advice and consent.
Yeah, thank you for that excellent question. Citizens Union has, I would say, so we've had slow, gradual expansions of advice and consent in New York City. We started with um, the DOI, the Department of Investigation. I think that was given, I think, in 1989 Charter Commission. The Corp Council was given in the 2019 Charter Commission. So I think what we had is kind of like specific case-by-case studies of roles and whether there's any element in that role that would make sense to subject it to advice and consent. The roles that I mentioned, like the DOI commissioner and the Corp Council, were placed under advice and consent because there was some kind of conflicts of interest in that role, right? Because it serves both the council and the mayor, or the DOI commissioner can investigate the mayor, so you needed two sides. The council last year proposed a kind of a wide expansion of advice and consent of, I think, 20 commissioners. We at Citizens Union did not support that because we think a gradual case-by-case process is the one to go. A commission like this one is the place to really consider these issues. However, we think that the police commissioner is one of these cases that requires that should go under advice and consent. The reason is that this is the arguably perhaps the most important commissioner. It runs the only department that has the ability to arrest people, to deprive them of their liberty, and it touches the lives of every New Yorker. And we do believe that the New York City Police Department has had, a history of kind of self-governance, and many mayors have had difficult time, or either because they wanted to or because they didn't want to touch it, found a difficult time governing the the NYPD. Adding the police commissioner to process of advice and consent will provide the sort of guardrails that extremely important central commissioner to the lives of New Yorkers is placed under some sort of measure of accountability. And as we mentioned in our report, we do so on the assumption that the council, when it evaluates those nominees, will do so in a responsible manner. Because as you mentioned, these kind of processes often get politicized, and that is something we do fear.
That going forward, it's not you wouldn't necessarily object to other agencies being subject to this, but you're saying that they should be dealt with on a sort of case-by-case basis with a contained argument for each one.
That is exactly the case, the justification of why such commissioner and not another commissioner. That was our issue with the proposal that was brought before the council last year, which we didn't really, get a proper explanation of why, a certain commissioner is in, another commissioner is out, and why 29, but why not 19? So, and again, I think charter revision commissions in the past have offered an excellent process to really review advice and consent and consider it on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a practical question again. Once you move to an odd even years, since federal elections are not ranked choiced, but local are, how will you accommodate for the likely confusion that would arise of people voting for candidates for federal election?
Yeah.
without ranked choice and then electing local people with ranked choice. So that's one question. And the other question has to do with the issue of advice and consent. We've been through this pendulum when we did the chancellor and mayor control, and then came back in 19 with the corp council, and then sort of keep going back to whether it makes sense mayoral control and whether the mayor should be held accountable on that because it's such an important issue. And it's such a big part of the budget, right? The decisions have to make as opposed to the corp council, right? So um, since the council exercises that budget price, I mean, how will you accommodate for that in a politicized environment like we have now? Sorry, Madam Chair, this is.
And just a clarification, accommodate for a chancellor, for the school chancellor, or?
For the police.
Oh, for the budget. Okay, so your first question on ranked choice voting, which is an excellent question, which we hear a lot, and we'll need two ballots. We'll need two separate ballots. One would be ranked choice voting. One would be kind of quote unquote regular voting. But we actually have that now because on odd numbered years, we also vote for DAs and for judges, and those are not ranked choice. So this year, I think we'll have 3 DAs up for election. So, and we had that in 2021. So we already have 2 separate ballots. One is ranked choice. Another one is kind of regular. In fact, judges, you need to elect more than one. So there are kind of 3 methods of voting on your ballot. And we haven't seen voters get too confused about it. We have also looked into other cities that do ranked choice voting in even numbered years. So specifically, for example, in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland do that. So we have an internal research, which I'm happy to share with you later on, about whether that impacts the increase in voter turnout or voter drop off, right? Are voters more confused? And we have not seen any negative impact. So the quick answer is that we'll have to do 2 ballots. And again, I'll point to the long implementation process that will allow us to provide voter education and kind of make sure that the BOE knows how to handle that situation, which it already does. And happy to send over more data and numbers. On the second question, in terms of the police commissioner's budget, so did you mean whether that will be connected to the advice and consent of the commissioner will be connected to the budget of the department? Sorry if I misunderstood.
Questions bound to arise during the process, which, again, over time for police practices, all that stuff, have a major fiscal implication for the city, and likely to that become a decision by which the council does not provide consent, right? Over the issue of balancing, holding the mayor accountable, whoever that mayor may be.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of the advice and consent process is actually the kind of before even a name is nominated, because the fact that a mayor knows that they have to nominate someone that the council will need to approve means that there's already some negotiations, or that the name that is being proposed is usually one that kind of can pass that vote. So I think a lot of it is not, much of it is during the hearing and discussions over the plans of the commissioner and their plans for city budget over time and all that. But much of it is actually before that, and just kind of sets the different considerations for a mayor when they propose a name.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from the commission?
Ben, thank you for your testimony. On the advice and consent, I want to know, have you given any thought to having a shot clock for this? So by that I mean is we would want to avoid a situation that happened at the federal level where back in 2016, the president nominated a nominee to the Supreme Court, and then Congress just didn't take up the nomination. So there was no vote. And that was a way where Congress sort of like killed the nomination. So what would be a a guard against that? Because if you didn't, you would have a scenario where the council could just sit on a nomination and then there'd be no police commissioner. Or conversely, the mayor, not wanting to go through the confirmation process, could just appoint an acting commissioner, and then that person wouldn't have to go through advice and consent. So just wondering, how do you guard against the council not taking up a vote? How do you guard against a sort of recess appointment that would circumvent the advice and consent process?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think the way to guard against the first scenario you present is to set a deadline. So a mayor nominates a name, and within, let's say, 60 days, the council must hold a hearing and a vote on that name. And if they don't, that person is appointed. I believe that is the case with the Department of Investigation nominee, although I don't have it in front of me. There's some sort of timeline there, and that should be the same. You can have a sort of opposite scenario, an opposite option to your second scenario that addresses the second scenario, where if there's a recess nominee or someone that is appointed as an interim appointed and the mayor refuses to bring someone to an advice and consent, the charter could theoretically say if there's an interim appointment for more than 4 months, the council is allowed to appoint the police commissioner. Now that's, we definitely don't want to get to that situation where the council appoints a commissioner that the mayor does not appreciate. But, I think the idea is to provide these kind of checks and balances that would deter the other side from misusing their power.
Thank you. Going towards now on the subject of moving elections to even number years, you suggested a 3-year term. Is your preference that if we were to move municipal elections to even number of years, that they happened during the presidential election and not the midterm election? Is that why you suggested 3 years?
The legislation in Albany currently proposes it's a bit hard to explain the mechanism because the mechanism that that establishes transition is based on the current election cycle. Because in our current election cycle in New York, the election will be in 2025 and 2021. The way the bill is structured, that means we will move to a presidential year. The legislator has used the same mechanism to move county and town elections. They passed the bill in 2023 using the same thing. So the question of whether you're moving to a midterm or a presidential year depends on, it's somewhat random almost. It depends on your current cycle. Most large cities in New York State have the same election year as New York City. I think Yonkers is on the other side, 2023, 2027, but most of them have the same one. On the merits, a presidential cycle sees way higher turnout. So like you can't even compare the two. We would likely double or triple our turnout on a presidential cycle, and a midterm gubernatorial cycle. It really depends on the kind of competitiveness of the race, either the race for the House or the race for the governorship. The data shows that there's still a large increase in those cycles, but the presidential cycle is definitely the one that sees the highest turnout.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the last question, I promise. And just a thought on the moving elections, and before I get to my last question, I think would also have the effect of reducing the amount of special elections that happen in New York City, because oftentimes you will see council members run for state office, state elected officials run for council, and then that creates this sort of constant special election, which has really low turnout. So that's a benefit that I think often doesn't get talked about.
Costs a lot of money. Also.
Right, and there's a financial aspect as well. Top 2 voting. So one, this was on the ballot 22 years ago. It failed miserably. Was wondering what are lessons learned? I mean, we live in a different political environment than in 2003. So just wondering about that. I guess it was 2 questions, sorry. And then my second question is, you say top 2, and I'm wondering, have you guys given any thought to the models that exist, for example, in Alaska, where they have a top 4 nonpartisan primary, where in the first round, everybody votes for just one candidate, and then the top four make it to the general election, where then the general election becomes a ranked choice voting.
Mhm.
So just wondering, do you have any thoughts? Are you married to top two? Any consideration to a top four system?
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for those questions. First, on the 2003 Bloomberg nonpartisan elections, which also came from a charter revision commission, um, I would say two things. First, it was an off, 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 off cycle election. So not like the regular mayoral election. There was nothing on the ballot, maybe judges. So we just looked at it actually last week. There was the voter turnout was 15%, 1.5. Also, we basically an entire generation has passed since then. So, I think opinions change, considerations change. That proposal was for a complete nonpartisan election, which is in fact what most cities in the country do. We actually don't think we should go full on nonpartisan, meaning that candidates would be banned from presenting their party affiliation on the ballot, and parties would not be able to endorse candidates. We think there's it's a kind of a good element of voter education to let the voters know what party is the candidate registered with. So that's why we don't call it nonpartisan elections. We use open elections or other ways. And I will say the one thing that has changed, as I mentioned, is that we do see more unaffiliated voters now than way back then. The little report I sent you has this nice little chart that shows, we now have almost 22% of registered voters are unaffiliated. If you'll see this nice little green thing, it's the only one that is rising. And young voters, there's data that shows that young voters are more unaffiliated than older voters. Some communities as well.
So just for clarification, when you say unaffiliated, you mean not registered with either of the two major parties?
Right. Because theoretically, Republicans can now vote in the Republican Party and Democrats can. So, I mean, there are several benefits for such a system, but, a major benefit is just that we have over 1 million voters that can't vote in any primary. And we know from surveys that those voters are actually politically involved and informed and want to vote. There's an excellent study by Common Cause, which I linked in this report, that surveyed unaffiliated voters in New York and did find that they say that if they had a chance to vote in a primary, they would vote. So that's on that question. And the other question you had, oh shoot, I'm sorry. What was it? Apologies.
No, it was just a comment on just reducing the amount of special elections.
You had some.
Oh, no,
The 2 versus 4.
Oh, 2 versus 4. Yes, sorry.
We did think about that. We are not. This is not a Catholic wedding between us and the top two primary systems. So we think the most important element here is to open up the primary system. And yes, as you mentioned, Alaska has this really interesting model. Other states have only ranked choice voting in a general election without any primary. But some element of that kind of a system that would allow more people to vote is what we're looking at.
Great. Thank you very much.
I understand that we have been joined by a commissioner on Zoom. Yes. Okay. So Commissioner, I'm sorry, I just don't know how the technology works here. So Commissioner Mark Rasapiso has joined us. So I want to just acknowledge that he has joined us by Zoom. Thank you very much, Mr. Weinberg, for your testimony.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your thoughtful questions.
I want to invite to speak Lacey Tober from the Brooklyn Borough President's Office. Lacey.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Lacey Tauber. I'm representing Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso. He wants to thank Speaker Adams for forming this commission and for all of you for holding the first hearing here in Brooklyn. Yay. So Borough President Reynoso was really excited to hear about the commission's focus because it gives us the opportunity to discuss how we can better support our city's 59 community boards, which are the foundation of our local democracy. The charter mandates them with 22 responsibilities, including holding public hearings on issues facing their districts, creating their annual statements of district needs and budget priorities, weighing in on local land use proposals, and working with city agencies to communicate information to residents and evaluate service delivery, among many other things. Yet, due to chronic underfunding, community boards struggle to carry out these mandates, let alone their day-to-day work. Most community boards have very small staffs with little money left over to hire other assistants, such as professional planners or communication support. Additionally, the charter's framework for external support for community boards is confusing and scattered, calling on the borough president's offices, the Civic Engagement Commission, and other agencies to provide various and sometimes overlapping support. However, none of these entities receive enough funding to do so adequately, and none of them have supporting community boards as their primary mandate. An example of the difficulties this can cause for day-to-day operations is regarding IT support. The charter mandates the Office of Technology and Information, OTI, to assist the boards with some technological needs. Yet because OTI only has one staff person who supports all 59 boards, it can take the agency 3 or more months to create an email address, 3 years to remove one, and weeks to address email access issues. So we have 3 recommendations that build on the Future of Community Boards Working Group and incorporate the experiences of Brooklyn's district managers and our office's experience appointing the boards. I'm going to have to follow up with you via email because my second page printed blank. Oops. But I'm going to summarize the 3 recommendations for you. Luckily, I have them on my phone as well. So the first one is to adequately fund community board staffing. So we have a proposal that would increase these budgets to allow for the payment of competitive salaries within existing NYC pay ranges and necessary OTPS to really help them with staff recruitment and retention. And we have a funding mechanism proposed for that. The second one is really the big one. So that would be to create a central office to support the city's 59 community boards. And similarly to what was discussed before, what we're thinking about is something kind of like the independent budget office that has an independent budget. And it's kind of inspired by the city council central staff, if you're familiar with that model, where they have people kind of dedicated to support on all kinds of things. And so we have a more detailed proposal, as I said, I'll share, but we have 8 areas that we think this new office could help with. One is planning expertise. That's an obvious one. They're always asking for it. They need it to more effectively participate, not only just like in the ULERT process, but also to initiate their own planning initiatives should they decide to do that. The second one is communications and technology. I hit on that, but it's much more complicated. There's a state mandate now for them to live stream meetings. It's been really difficult for some of these boards. Space needs, working with DCAS, they need accessibility requirements, public spaces to meet. Their offices are in various states of disrepair. Human resources and EEO, guidance on hiring and firing staff, trainings that the city agencies get. Procurement is a big one, intergovernmental support, liaisoning with the agencies, legal support, FOIL requests, other guidance, and then trainings, land use, budget, Robert's Rules of Order, conflicts of interest. There's a whole bunch. And then finally, our third recommendation would be to change the community board member appointment date from April 1st to August 1st. And then also to require new applicants to have attended at least one board meeting prior to applying. The date thing is basically just because the new board members start right before they go on summer recess. And so that's a member retention issue, among other things. And then having them attend the board meeting is really because we have seen a phenomenon where people apply without really fully understanding what they're getting into, go to their first meeting and never come back. And we would like to people to really understand, what board membership is and what the commitment is. So those are our proposals. As I said, I'll share the written version with you via email. Thank you so much for your time. And also Mike Raccioppo, who's on Zoom, couldn't be here tonight because he's not feeling well, but he's the borough president's appointee. So you can speak with him about this as well.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have questions?
You do realize your proposal would take people represented by a union with a collective bargaining agreement away from that situation, may violate state law on preemption as it applies to your suggestions of hiring and firing and salaries of folks that may be already in a union under the National Labor Relations Act.
But we were still imagining that they would be city employees. We specifically wanted to make sure that those the staff lines are tied to the city employee titles.
Which are
Sorry
governed.
if I misspoke
No,
on
no,
that.
I just want to clarify.
No.
Because those city workers, of which I represent
Yeah.
a few, about 150,000, are governed by pattern bargaining, which are, their competitive salaries, their minimum, maximum. Most of the people that work for community boards are community titles.
Yeah. We are actually suggesting keeping the folks in the community board offices in those jobs, and then adding a separate central staff that would assist them with other things. Even with, 3 or 4 employees, they're still going to face a lot of these issues. So it's a both and here. We're not suggesting moving the staff out to a different place.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I apologize for not knowing enough about how our city government works to be able to answer this question for myself, but understanding that charter revision is sort of precious real estate, is there any way to accomplish anything that you've talked about that would not have to go through the charter revision process?
That's a good question, and it's something we're still looking into kind of simultaneously to this advocacy. So we can get back to you on that.
So I just wanted to thank you. As I mentioned before, I work for the Office of the Queensborough President, and this is an issue that I've been working on a lot over the past couple of years. I just wanted to emphasize the salience of a lot of the issues raised in your testimony is increased with the onset of term limits, which obviously don't affect staff of community boards, but it does affect the institutional knowledge of the board itself. So I do envision in a few years' time, 2027 is when those term limits initially kick in, that boards are going to need assistance in an even greater respect than they might now, because a lot of that institutional knowledge that's existed in the form of volunteers who serve on the board are going to no longer be serving on the board. And also your comment about requiring appointees to have attended a meeting. I fully agree with that. That's something that our office tends to look at very closely, and it's a factor in appointment. I am uncertain whether this forum and these efforts would be the best way, or having that as a mandate would make the most sense. I would echo what Commissioner Winston Griffith brought up about whether this perhaps would be something better addressed through a local law as opposed to a public referendum, as this is something that was addressed just, I believe, 3-4 years ago, or I forgot what year it is, 6 years ago now, with a referendum then. But I do really take these issues very seriously, and I appreciate you bringing them up.
Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners?
Thank you. Lacey, thank you very much for your testimony on behalf of the borough president. Just with one question, really. The council central staff model, works because the city council speaker ultimately is in charge of all those employees, and they are the ones through their staff who do all the hiring and firing. So who would be the entity, who would be responsible for hiring and basically overseeing that central staff? Would it be all 59 community boards? Would it be the 5 borough presidents, or are you envisioning another mechanism?
So that's a great question. We went back and forth on this and back and forth on this for a long time. It's actually in the testimony. I skipped it. So, um, what we landed on is a committee of 5 district managers representing each of the 5 boroughs, elected every 2 years by all the district managers and having a term limit similar to the board members one. And so those people would hire and conduct regular performance reviews for a director who would then be in charge of day-to-day operations for the office.
Great. Thank you very much.
Actually, it's changed. The hiring of the city council staff has changed since they organized into a union. It's actually a 2-tier group that is hired separately for those represented by a union, those who are not. And goes to my question about those who are covered by one part of the collective bargaining law, some federal, some local. And so I wonder if you were making a discernible boundary between those who will be covered by a collective bargaining agreement, those who are in effect are will employees that would be appointed by the community boards and those who are leading. I think that's a big issue in it.
Yeah, again, we're not trying to touch the staff lines of the existing community boards other than like potentially upping their salaries and giving them lines that help them retain the staff. On the central office staff, I don't know how that would work for an independent agency. That's a great point and something that I think we should look into. Thank you.
No, I have one.
Oh, sorry.
So the Civic Engagement Commission that was created by the
Mhm.
18 Charter Commission is supposed to assist community boards, and particularly around land use matters. So we wanted to know if your proposal to reform that, is your proposal to reform that commission in some way?
Well, so my understanding right now of how they are meeting that mandate, and this is kind of old information, so excuse me if I'm not correct, is that they have basically put together a list of potential consultants that the boards can use for land use matters. However, the problem is the boards just don't have the money to pay them. So it's not really doing what it needs to do. And so the idea that we were imagining, like, if you're familiar at all with the council central staff, they have planners who are dedicated to certain geographies, right? So maybe on this central office, there would be a set of professional planners who could work with a certain, number of boards directly to provide assistance to them. In a much more targeted way than what's being provided now. So I guess this would sort of supersede that mandate for the Civic Engagement Commission because it's not working in that way.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Thank you so very much for your testimony. We have one last person who is joining us by Zoom, and that is Lily Richmond. Lily Richmond is no longer with us? Okay, thank you. All righty. There are no other questions for the commissioners. I believe that concludes those folks who wanted to make a public testimony today. Is that correct? I want to remind everyone that our next hearing is Monday, March 10th at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. That will be followed by another hearing on Tuesday, March 18th at Queensborough Hall, Thursday, March 20th at the College of Staten Island, and Monday, March 24th at Lehman College. All hearings are from 5 to 7. And people are invited to testify either in person or via Zoom. And registration and further details on all hearings are on our website at www.thecommission.nyc. Okay. There are no other thoughts or feedback.
Motion to adjourn.
I want to thank everybody for coming today, watching online or in person, and the commission staff who put together the materials today. I would like to hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And can I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, the motion carries, and thank you so much for joining, and we are adjourned.